Hi, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Page Group, I want to welcome each one of you to this webinar. I'm Nilay, Khandelwal, Managing Director for Page Group, looking after our Singapore business. Along with me, I've got two very experienced individuals as panelists from two completely different industries, but very familiar companies to most of us in this forum. First one is Chris Mead. He's the head of talent acquisition, APAC at DuPont. Chris has got more than 20 years of professional business experience throughout the wider APAC region and has a personal passion for how people can enable science and technology to improve our world and the way we live and work. Very relevant to the current times that we are in. Our second panelist is Imran Bustamam from Ninjavan. Again, a very common household name today. Imran is the head of human resources at Ninjavan. In his current role, he's focusing on attracting the best talent to work at Ninjavan, but at the same time, is looking at technology-led solutions to provide hassle-free delivery experience to their customers across Southeast Asia. And if all of you have been following the news, they've raised a very significant round of funding as of May this year as well. So thank you to both of you to taking the time out and coming to this webinar. Now, before we start the panel discussion on Agile workforce, I'm going to ask Jermaine Lim, the Marco Manager APAC for Page Group, to explain the Q&A section and polls to kickstart the webinar. Jermaine, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Nilay, and welcome everyone to our webinar. So all your video and audio functions have been disabled, so you don't need to adjust any settings. However, you'll still be able to interact with us during this webinar, either by looking at the bottom of your screen. You will either see a raise hand function or a chat function. Just type in any question you may have, and I will answer you as I'm moderating this webinar on the back end. At the end of this webinar, there will also be a Q&A segment with Nilay and the two panelists. So please type in your questions at the bottom of your screen where you see a Q&A box. When you go through the box, you will also see questions that will allow you to vote on questions from other attendees. That will make sure that we answer the top voted questions and make sure that we have all your questions answered. Finally, like I mentioned, we will keep this webinar very interactive. So what we also have is a live poll going. You will see it flash on your screen right now. It's just 3 simple questions. We will share the results later, but as you're answering, Nilay, you can go ahead with moderating the panelists.
Perfect. Thank you, Jermaine, on that. I think the subject of this webinar is Agile workforce and how do we deal with that during the current situation, but also when we come out of this. So probably it would be a great idea before I jump into a specific question. What is actually the definition of Agile, and what does that mean? And it could mean different things to different people. So maybe Imran, Chris, both of you, in your experiences working at DuPont and Ninjavan, what has been your experience with Agile and what are you doing to drive that within your organization? So maybe, Chris, you can go first.
Sure. Thank you, Nilay, and thank you, Jermaine and Page Group for the opportunity. It's a really fascinating discussion. So DuPont is and I'll just talk from a DuPont perspective, because everyone's got their opinion on Agile. It's very relevant. So DuPont is a 95% B2B manufacturing organization where the margins between getting it right and getting it not so right can be quite thin. So we have our own internal definitions, and I won't bore you with them all. But the first thing is that we are very much performance driven, and how we drive performance is around being ultra clear around what our goals are. The second thing is, and DuPont is an organisation which is more than nearly 220 years old, and so being really good experts at managing change, and along with creativity and innovation with that change is also central. But the biggest thing that we have learned over the hundreds of years is actually around being agile is actually talks to culture of your organization and fostering a culture of learning. So that comes with being creative and being innovative, but also trusting in the process and trusting in your colleagues in that ever-changing environment. So there's a few flavors of how we view Agile.
Thanks, Chris. Quite interesting. Imran, over to you.
So, hi guys, thanks for coming. Nilay, Jermaine, thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be participating in this, given our current situation. So, Ninjavan is very different from what DuPont is. We're quite a young company, 5-6 years old, right? Probably not as big as DuPont. We only have about 8,000 office staff across 6 markets. We primarily do last mile logistics, meaning B2C logistics most of the time, right? I think that the offering is starting to expand. And I think I initially mentioned that we recently got a round of funding. Well, not necessarily something, sure, we're a bit proud of that. But again, this also means that we're not yet able to stand on both our feet. So we're still trying to push at it. We're partly profitable now, trying to get solid profit margins across the group. So that's our aim in the next couple of years at least. So Agile HR, being sort of a tech-driven logistics company, agility comes from, the how Agile came about is really from software development. And I think similar to what Chris said, this is it's more mindset than it is a set of processes, right? There are certain principles. That you have to do, certain cadences of meetings that they suggest, but ultimately it is a mindset that everyone in the organization should take towards solving certain problems or solving organizational problems, right? It is very different, I feel, right, from organization to organization, but regardless of which, it is very tied to culture, right? Fortunately for us, being a tech company, this culture has already been ingrained from the start. We're still quite a young company, so we've not really lost that culture. The challenges for us in maintaining an agile HR culture, an agile business culture, is really trying to maintain it as the company grows older, and we have more people that are a lot more detached from the day one culture that we had 5 years ago. So that's agile for us, at least.
Thanks, Imran. I think common to both of you, I heard the word culture being a strong one across both companies. Fostering culture and learning, but it gets quite difficult. And jumping into a specific question on this whole agile methodology, and Singapore is a unique location given the fact that it happens to be the regional headquarters for most of the companies in APAC, and but a lot of decision making happens in this market. What has been your personal experience in your organization during this circuit breaker, and how easy or challenging was to manage cross-country relationship while driving business? You talked about culture, fostering that culture of learning, mindset. If you could give practical examples to our audience who also happens to be mostly in regional roles today, that would be really helpful. So, Imran, you want to go first?
Yes, I'm trying to think of an answer for that. I work in the regional office. The regional HQ is primarily designed to help all these local markets grow, not only through enablement of certain skill sets and certain processes, but also as a coordinating nexus of all these business processes, right? I think not just circuit breaker, but I think this entire COVID episode has stopped us from generally traveling around and building relationships face to face. As a startup, we didn't really have a business continuity or a BCP plan in place. I think that's the last on our minds when we actually went through this. I think a lot of startups face the same issue, right? Like profitability and sustainability are definitely important, but no company 3 years old will definitely have a well-documented BCP, especially top of mind, right? So for us, it was really about making sure, at least for me, right? It was really about making sure that we were still able to get to the people as much as possible. right? Safety being a concern, updates on how people are doing, getting constant reports on how people are doing. I think that was very difficult at the start, considering the fact that we were balancing those business continuity principles and at the same time trying to get a sense of what is going on and what to expect. I think the same could be said for the rest of the business in ensuring that in understanding the effects that this had on our network. I'm quite sure companies like DuPont, you've gone through SARS, you've probably gone through other iterations of other pandemics, but for us, this was a first. And considering that we are also a bit young, this is the first time that most of us would have actually experienced this during our working lives, right? So this was entirely new to us. It was, lack of coordination. I can even say lack of planning, right? Getting visibility over all our pieces on the ground. The ability for the regional team to offer support to the local markets. I think those were questions that we had at the start. I think we were very quick to bounce back in making sure that things were in place. But again, this comes back to the mentality that we had on being agile, right? A lot of problems. We have a lot of problems. MVP to put the minimum viable product to push out in terms of solving all these problems. We'll just push it out first, and then we continue reiterating, which is the mindset that we've always taken towards a lot of the problems that we had. So this is really a very interesting year for a lot of us. We totally did not expect it, as with many other people. I'm not sure how Chris experienced it, but from what I understand, it's a very stressful situation for a lot of HR teams outside of within Singapore and outside of Singapore as well.
I think it's quite refreshing, Imran, to hear the candid answer of not having a BCP to actually ending up planning a BCP approach. You'd be surprised the number of clients that I've spoken to, similar boat as yours, 6-7 years old business or 3-year-old businesses, some of them in co-work share businesses, where they overnight had to create list of various BCP measures if this happened or that happened. And many organizations have gone about creating that risk appetite and building that BCP into the program, which probably we neglected because we never thought that this would happen. So I think that it has triggered a lot of work and identifying people then to take those tasks if those situations happen. So quite interesting to hear that from you, Imran. Over to you, Chris. As Imran mentioned, of course, DuPont as an organization has been there for a long period of time, gone through many cycles. This cycle seems to be very different than most of the other cycles, for sure. What has been your way of navigating through cultural challenges? Every country seems to be in a different phase as well of when they have gone into this COVID cycle and when they are recovering.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking back to SARS and I'm thinking back to GFC and so on. But they were materially different. They didn't hit every country and they hit different countries in different ways. But you could still, even with SARS, you could still get it in and around the region to most countries. You could get over to the US, which was basically not touched by SARS. If your company still had the money and the investment, you could still travel. But this is something completely different. And so it was very interesting listening to Imran saying he got caught off a little bit off guard. Well, we did too, right? And being very open and honest about that. DuPont's a very high-touch organisation. And what I mean by that is we stay very close to our customers and our raw material end producers as well. So that means a lot of literal FaceTime. And I don't mean like this. I mean actually going to them and spending time with them, right? Walking the floor of the factories and so on. And then suddenly, China's our biggest country. It's biggest country for Asia Pacific in terms of revenue and people. And then very suddenly we couldn't go there. I used to get up there twice a quarter. I can't do that anymore. And I've got a large team in China. Similarly, Singapore's a regional headquarters. Suddenly we couldn't go to China. And then we couldn't go to Korea. And then we couldn't go to Japan. And suddenly it all got shut down. And so because one of the consequences, and it talks to Imran's point about technology, one of the consequences of being an organisation which was so face-to-face high touch is that, to be honest, we weren't really good at doing what we're doing now. And so we very swiftly had to get onto Zoom and get onto Skype and get onto. We actually use Microsoft Teams now. I mean, they're all much for muchness. But now, in the last 2 months, we've all become experts at Microsoft Teams and doing that. But then it's also a challenge because how much, so for example, with my team, how much is too much of this sort of stuff? Because you can get Zoom fatigue, right? How much and how much is just about right? So I have a catch up with my team once a week, and that seems to be about, where we're at. But equally, now we've got the Timezone Challenges, and they were always there before, but now they've been amplified. And people with regional roles, generally, say in APAC, will have a touch point to EMEA, and they'll have a touch point to LATAM or to the US, which means your day suddenly, instead of having 4 appointments, might have 12, in an extreme circumstance. So there's a part where we need to look after ourselves as well in that. So that's been my journey, and the colleagues in the regional office here, and it's still going.
Yeah, that's quite a relevant topic on Zoom fatigue. I think it all started with you need to communicate a lot more because you've gone into an environment whereby you're not physically present with your colleagues, to the point that I'm saying a lot more than what I would have done otherwise. Because what could have been done across the floor now needs to be done on 15 minutes at least on a call.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult when you're working from home. I've got feedback through the surveys that we have run is it's difficult to differentiate between what is work from home and personal life at home, because work is at home right now. So I think it's quite important to make sure that there is a clear discipline around it. Once the market picks up, we want our people to be roaring and going back and attacking the market and not feeling as if we have just literally lost a lot of the will to actually powerhouse through the good times. It's quite a relevant one to relook into if you have not looked into it yet. I think before jumping into the next segment, which is around talent, Jeremy, do we have the poll results?
Yes, we do, Nilay. Yep, you will see it flashed on screen right now.
Quite interesting. I would probably take 2 minutes from each one of you to look at these answers and see if you resonate with the same. You found something surprising.
Yep. So I'll go first if you like. So I filled out the survey myself, and on behalf of DuPont in Singapore, but also around the region, and I'm in the top box, one of the 48%. So we are still hiring. Has our hiring slowed down a bit? Yeah, it has, absolutely. But are we still hiring? Yes, yes, we are. The world is going to be a different place at the end of this, but a lot of things are still going to be around, and we are quite a diversified business, from nutrition and bioscience to safety and construction and electronics. So all the devices that we're talking on now have got DuPont in them. So we're quite diversified, so that sort of helps our portfolio as well. So certainly on the first one, and I'm actually not surprised, because I was looking at the jobs on LinkedIn today just prior to this session, and in Singapore there's more than 50,000 jobs which are advertised on LinkedIn, and JobStreet has something in excess of 30,000. So clearly people have slowed down their hiring, but they certainly haven't stopped at all.
And what about engagement, retention being one of the biggest challenge? Are you facing the same?
Maybe I'll go for this. Sorry.
Yeah, you go.
So maybe for the second question, yes, employee engagement is very important for us. As much as a lot of meetings can be done on Zoom, right? A lot of informal social interaction, understanding unity in terms of a shared purpose in the company. I don't think these can be done formally through a Zoom call, right? So social interaction is something that is still difficult to build over just Zoom meetings. I think then the question of deliberate social engineering comes into play, right? How can HR help in engineering some social situations in which not necessarily related to work, but just to build interpersonal connections between, not only within the team, but also across teams, just to ensure that, is just more than the people that I see in the gallery view in Zoom. It's really other departments who are also going through the same thing, other countries who are geographically very different away and very far away, but they're still going through this shared challenge. So HR has, or rather my team has started to really look at this social engineering bit quite a fair bit, right? It is also very important since our employee engagement surveys are running at the same time. So yeah, it is, if anything, it has become more important than hiring at this point.
So you mentioned, Imran, about running employment engagement surveys. Now, in a classic environment, you would run that once a year or once in 2 years across your organization. Do you see the need of running this more often, given the nature of work? And probably we might not go into a full work from office anytime soon, and it will be a hybrid model for some time.
Okay, so to answer that question, I think it's two parts. The first question is really, should we run this more often, right? Ninjavan, so beyond just COVID, Ninjavan's going through a phase where we're starting to structure up a lot of our processes, right? Being outcome focused, yes, you can say that a lot, but it has to be reflected in the kind of processes that you put in, the kind of performance management measures that you in place. So we're going into a bit of a cultural change where, we're starting to implement a lot of these mechanical parts of HR, so to speak, right? In pushing through mechanical HR instruments here, there's always going to be a chance that culture will be impacted quite a fair bit. So for us, there's always been an issue of trying to measure as quickly as possible and as often as possible the sentiment on the ground in relation to how employees are engaged, how they feel about certain things, right? That's one thing. I think with COVID, the second part of it is COVID, right? One interesting reaction that I got from a lot of the HR folks across the region was, could we delay the employee engagement survey, right? Because they definitely knew that this would impact the employee engagement scores. Definitely impact, right? There's no question about it. I think that's a good reminder that engagement is not just a matter of a score reflecting your actual performance, right? It is really a sense check on how your employees are doing, not necessarily a score, right? It shouldn't be just taken as an absolute score and left at that. I think my decision was, let's just go with it. Let's just take the score it is. More importantly, farm and harvest the kind of qualitative inputs that employees are giving, so that if this ever happens again, we are prepared, right? And it's really just for the better of the entire organization, not just the score. And I think that the senior management are very supportive of that as well. So it's a good reminder to a lot of HR folks that employee engagement is not just a score, but really getting an opportunity to really get a sense of the employee population. So that's something that was quite interesting to me during COVID, at least.
Yeah, I think that's quite relevant, I think, to run that irrespective of what you think the score would be and taking that opinion forward. I think if I look at the third question and the answer to that, it links very, very closely with what we are looking at in terms of the second segment, which is on sustaining continuous learning in the constant change that we are in. And the question to both of you is really around, how do we actually go about building a flexible plan for our talent management and talent acquisition to nurture innovation and embrace the changes that lies ahead?
Yeah, so I'll go first if you want. So I actually found this question the hardest because I wanted to answer yes to all of them. In there. If I put my professionally aggressive talent acquisition hat on, it would definitely be the first one. I'm always on the lookout for strong talent. But I took the organisational view, and I actually ticked the third one. It was interesting. Less than a month into this pandemic, our leadership teams and our strategy teams were working on and sort of like brainstorming what is going to be the new normal. Is there going to be one global new normal? Is there going to be an APAC new normal? Is there going to be one for China, one for here, one for there? What does that look like? And what does that mean for people? What are the needs of the people? And therefore, how can we go and meet those needs? So I ended up ticking the third one in that list there, but I think they're all relevant. In terms of training, learning and development, quite by coincidence, last year we hired here in Singapore an Asia Pacific, we call it leadership and learning leader, and he went about very quickly putting in place the framework for people at all levels to continue their personal training, learning, and development for their own journey, and had their own journeys mapped out. So that was quite a timely thing as well.
Okay, thanks, Chris, for that. Imran, anything different at your end?
Yeah, same to Chris. I wanted to tick yes to everything, but I actually chose the first one, which is securing strong talent in market. Especially for a TA team, considering the fact that a lot of projects are impacted, at least for the local team here, right? Things like campus recruitment or campus engagements and stuff like that, they require a lot of relationship building. They require a lot of lead cultivation and just meeting people. That's quite impacted. In filling the time, the best way will actually be to really secure good talent in the market, right? I think there are a lot of great talents out there that have been, unfortunately let go by their companies and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, these were people that maybe would have been inaccessible to us previously, right? So it's what we're trying to do to make use of the situation, right? Yeah, everyone thinks that it's an employer's market now. Yes and no. There are a lot of talents, but the percentage of which are good is still the same. So, yeah, it doesn't mean there's a lot of talents. It doesn't mean that we'll always hire. So I think that's a misconception that we have to correct, I feel.
That's a fair assessment, Imran. I think that's always going to be a challenge. There were news articles that were rolled out the last 2 weeks that with the changes that are coming about and the skill sets that are becoming in demand over the period of time, the talent shortage will still be a challenge as the markets recover. And this is a very important question, or a very interesting insight that most of the customers end up looking at, whether it's a client or a candidate for us, is what are those skill sets? And sometimes it differs from organization to organization as well. So it would be quite interesting for the audience to just hear from both of you what sort of skill sets you deem has become important in today's context and what will be going forward. Chris?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just thinking about that. I guess there's hard skill sets and then there's attributes. We tend to look at what personal attributes of that a candidate might have. DuPont is generally a scientific company, so for a particular role, working in a laboratory or working in a factory somewhere, you need to have that qualification or you need to have that skill or that training. So that's one part. But moreover, from an personal attributes point of view, we have started, and it's interesting how you identify and how you test for this. We haven't quite nailed that yet, but we're getting there. Is how you can identify people with resilience. So that's the first thing. And I think that is not going to go away for at least another year or so, and it will always remain in some parts. The world is going to be ever changing for the next couple of years. And so if you want to hire employees and you want them to have a career with you, as opposed to just a job for a year and a half or so, we need to make sure that they can ride the bumps as well, with the organisation. So that's the first thing. And then some people call it team player. I don't particularly like that term. It sort of grates me a little bit. But I would say flexibility and having the wider view. So yes, my job is to do this, and my organisation wants me to do that to the best of my ability. However, human beings are incredible creatures, and they can be flexible to provide value elsewhere as well. And so without wanting to lump a lot more work on people, we've created a lot of mini project teams where you might be working on something, and it might only be 5% of your time or 10% of your time, but in a completely different area to help smooth the wheels along. So those are a couple of attributes that we look at. Resilience is one, and then the flexibility and the ability to look outside of, what are my tram tracks.
Thanks, Chris. And I think the element of the softer skill set remains quite an important one, especially in a virtual environment. What about you, Imran?
I agree with Chris, actually, a lot of it. The softer skill set is particularly important for us, primarily because the problems that we have, or rather the way we are getting into is quite ambiguous, right? There are a couple of things that we want to see in all employees, regardless of whether you're in accounting or whether you're in HR. Things like resilience. I think resilience is very important, right? The ability, if you're going to work in an agile environment, the ability to handle rejection or handle feedback, handle the fact that it's not going to work. This should spur you on as compared to putting yourself down and not try to improve and degenerate into misery. For us, we look at three things primarily, right? Resilience being something that's always been there. Three other things: the ability to deliver on promises, right? A track record of that, leaning towards action, the ability to just take a leap and act on the 70% instead of trying to find a perfect solution for everything, which underpins a lot of the agile mentality. And learning and improving, right? Being very self-aware on your limitations, right? Your team's limitations, ability to take feedback and process that positively. I think these three things are very important, right? Much more than, say, the ability to, or rather an accounting degree, for example, right? So ambiguous problems, we want people to be able to handle that with a lot of these like soft skills and attributes, like what Chris said. So especially in this day and age where there's a supply of talent, not necessarily from the same industry, and a lot of people fighting over good talent, I think it's very important that we start looking at these attributes or soft skills.
Thanks, Imran. I think jumping into the next segment, which is more on looking at the post-COVID-19 recovery. And the answer to that is very difficult in terms of the time frame. I don't think any of the experts globally have got a clue as to what that time frame looks like. But I think looking optimistically and looking at what we can control, how do you think would be the trend of hiring moving forward? I personally saw a trend at the back of global financial crisis that companies were more keen on hiring fixed-term contractors or a one-year contract staff to provide them flexibility and faster talent onboarding. How relevant do you think that would be as market recovers in a staggered manner?
Yeah, do you want me to go first? No, so it's interesting. I think it was a couple of weeks ago I saw Twitter put out an announcement that they were offering their employees that they could work from home forever if they wanted to, which was really interesting. I don't know whether that was a real estate play or whether there was some sort of genuine attempt there. But I look at it through the lens in APAC and just the return to work and what is going to be the new normal in terms of the environment, and then also the hiring that plays into that. So for DuPont, our folk in China, in the offices in China, went back to work. I'm thinking it was about 5 weeks ago now, and they were all really looking forward to going back into the office, which was an interesting insight because they had been working from home for about 8 to 9 weeks, something like that, and they were hell-bent on wanting to go back into that office, look at, interact with their colleagues, go to lunch with their colleagues, and get back in. So that they really missed that. And then a few weeks later, South Korea went back into the office, and our HR team in South Korea booked a restaurant a week in advance to go out and celebrate going back to the office. And Thailand has just done the same. So that's a really very small sample, but an interesting lens on, if you had an idea about working from home forever, what a challenge that that might be. I think technology has come a long way in terms of the interaction and the quality and what you can do. And this is only my personal feeling, is I think we would be wise not to underestimate the value of person-to-person contact, sitting down, having a cup of coffee with someone, taking someone to lunch, whatever it might be, and really learning who that person is. So it's a lot easier to really understand your colleagues if you're with them at work most days, rather than catching up on a Zoom or whatever it might be for 2 or 3 times a week. Just before I hand over to Imran for his experience, your question with regards to the GFC and the hiring, I remember that as well. I spent a lot of time in that time with my team at the time, hiring in banking and in technology, and those 2 verticals in particular were wherever they could, they would be. It's all contractors, because it takes the notional cost off the book, and also gives them more flexibility in terms of workforce up and down. And so you can see risk management in that. I don't know that that's going to happen this time. I think in some industry verticals it might. However, something that Imran said before really struck for me. The same amount of really great talent is out there. And if you're going to go and get some great talent and all organisations want it, then the last thing you want to do is bring it in and then lose it. So if you're going to find that talent, give that talent a permanent job and make sure that they contribute to your organisation. Those are my feels. But look, I think we'll know in the next 6 months or so how that plays out.
Thanks, Chris. Imran, your thoughts?
So one thing, so Chris earlier said that the new normal is, we don't know what it is, right? It can be very different from market to market. We really don't know. I don't think there is someone who is that kind of crystal ball with the kind of foresight to say this is the new normal, right? But there are certain things that we don't know, right? We don't know the long-term effects of permanently working from home. So as much as Twitter is a great company to be working for, I don't know. I don't understand the practical aspect of that, but that's a personal opinion. We really don't know the effect that a lack of social interaction has for the workforce. At least in totality, the whole workforce is working from home indefinitely.
Yeah. Then
we still don't know the long-term effects of that, right? Another thing that we don't know is whether this will happen again, whether this will happen across the markets or in particular markets, and when this will eventually die down. One thing that we have learned from this is the ability for our workforce to be working from home, right? Whether in totality or whether partially, right? This opens, and the fact that everyone is working from home, this automatically gives you, or as HR professionals, it gives you common ground for you to engage your business units on issues like telecommuting, right? Remote hiring, for example, things that they were not able to, things that they didn't want to take risks on previously. I think the shared experience does give you some, I would say, fodder for you to have these kind of conversations, right? Look at optionality for telecommuting, which previously, we probably wouldn't have explored. Those are the things that we're looking at. In terms of the trends that will emerge out of this, well, Ninjavan is in a stage where we're trying to optimize a lot of our costs, right? It is no longer the days of 2016 where it was just let's all get on the back of the bus and let's go to work. It's really just trying to make sure we make the right hires. And I mean, all the other companies have the same mentality. If they are the best people that I have in the organization, there is no way that I will let them go, right? And yeah, so it's very hard. It's still going to be very hard for us to find the best talent. It's going to be, it won't be very different. The processes in which we hire the best talent won't be very different. But I think in terms of optionality now, we are able to look at certain roles being either offshored or being done remotely, or consolidated or optimized, just to ensure that we are spending the right kind of money on the right kind of people, right? So if anything, I really don't think that it will be a situation where we'll start hiring people on contract, because I don't think that's a solution that, and this is a personal opinion, I don't think that's a solution that is very attractive to employees in Southeast Asia. it's very hard to retain that kind of talent. And a permanent solution is always better than a contractual one, if I could share my views on this. So yeah, if anything, COVID has given us a lot more optionality, a lot more information to work on when it comes to remote working, when it comes to telecommuting, when it comes to relationships. But maybe it won't change the way that we recruit or the kind of people that we recruit so much.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned quite clearly, it depends on what the organization is and what are we looking for.
Right.
Talking to various companies, big or small, one of the ways that people have looked at recovery or optimizing the risk is to look at project-based hires rather than permanent hires, and that's where contracting probably fits in a little bit more. And it really depends on organizations. So tech companies, some of the project-oriented environment, whether it's oil and gas, it was going through a tough time, but still a lot of projects in the pipeline of running their big plants in there. They're all very time-bound activities, and we've seen a surge in demand in there because those projects may or may not come back on a recurring basis. So you want to hire for that length of the project rather than what would have been a permanent project after project in some cases. But quite an interesting one to see how market reacts this time around. Generally, the tendency from a regional perspective is contracting bounces back much faster than the perm hirings. And that's just to do with the agility of hiring them. And probably Asia is slightly more behind some of the more mature markets when it comes to temp or contracting, like markets in Australia or UK or European markets. But definitely we have seen improvement in the kind of contracting hires that we've seen. It's no longer a mat cover only. It has become more of project-based and talented individuals hired on an interim basis, even at senior levels. Demand for interim CFOs have gone up. We've got companies who are just focusing on that as a business. But I think looking at some of the things that you guys have shared, which I'm sure is quite insightful to a lot of people in this webinar today, I thought we will go into the Q&A that we have got, some of the questions that have come up from different people, and use the next 10-15 minutes on that. So the first one I've got here with the maximum likes is from Jonathan Hammond. And he's asking, if working from home becomes much more prevalent in the future, it will impact on relationship building and colleague bonding. Would you agree that this is quite a depressing consequence, or we can overcome that? Chris, going back to the fact that you were booking a restaurant 1 week in advance, I think the comment is quite inappropriate.
I think the word depressing might be a little bit strong, but certainly I can just share I'll share my own personal experiences, but also my team. So as I said, after 8-9 weeks of working from home in Shanghai, we've got 2 large corporate offices in Shanghai. They could not wait to get back to work, and that doesn't mean that they didn't love their partner or their children and all that sort of stuff. They absolutely, but they couldn't wait to get back to work. So interesting insight. So I was watching that and I'm thinking, well, I wonder, is that a China thing or is that a DuPont thing? But then the same thing happened with Korea. So Jonathan asked an interesting question. My personal view is, and it ties back into productivity. People are productive at work if they're happy at work, right? And everyone knows that, right? And if they're well trained and they're well led and they can see their career path in front. And the interaction with their colleagues is uber important. And also the quality of interaction they have with their manager, with their boss, right? And I can do as great a job as I can possibly do, having lots of Zoom calls and team calls everywhere with my team around APAC. But if I haven't, so here's the thing: I haven't seen my employee in Korea for 1.5 years. And that's tough. So I think, Jonathan, to answer your question, I'm not sure about depressing, but I certainly think the relationship would change. And my personal opinion is it may not be as strong. So I'm a strong advocate of, yes, maintain a flexible workforce and so on, and work from home if and when you can and when you need to. But I think it's the human nature that we bond with our work colleagues. We spend more time at work than anything else that we ever do. So I think that human-to-human contact is really important. Sorry for the long answer, but I'm quite interested about how this one plays out.
Thanks, Chris. Definitely an important one. Next question for you, Imran. And I think it's quite relevant to what you talked about in terms of employee engagement surveys. It's from an anonymous attendee. Most answered that employee engagement and retainment is of concern right now. In trying times like this, how do we differentiate between satisfied employee and satisfied employees who just need job security?
So let me answer this question with an unpopular opinion. I think we are, if the company is ensuring that employees stay employed, right? Where even if it means that it dents the financials, yes, we cut down on certain things, but we try to keep your livelihood, intact. I would think that if I was an employee in that kind of company, I would be satisfied with the company. But I don't think that they are very independent things altogether, right? But maybe more specifically to this question, how do we know? Maybe I'll just shift the narrative a bit. How do we know that employees are responding accurately to employee engagement surveys? Right? I really don't believe that ENPS scores, or rather employee engagement scores, like the score itself really doesn't mean anything. What comes out of it is, what's most important is the qualitative feedback on how the company is doing, the ability for us to infer information from that, and then promise employees a certain degree of follow-ups, a certain degree of improvement. And that is where we are trying to tie the employer promise with actual output, right? Like we tell you that this is a good company to work for, and we're trying to live up to that promise by acting on the feedback that you give us. Right. So in answering this question, if I'm an employed employee, I will feel satisfied that I'm still employed. You might disagree with me, but at the same time, I think as HR professionals, we really should look at what, and I'm a big advocate of this, what does the employee engagement score mean to you? Is it just a KPI for you that determines your bonus, or are you really invested in the output and the actions that you make out of it, right? So if it's just a score for you, then I really can't help you there, but I hope that everyone really believes in the output and the promise that you gave your employees when they started, and you live up to that. So it makes the employee engagement survey more credible, more useful, and also more meaningful for everyone in the organization.
I think job security is a difficult one to answer in a times which are quite uncertain.
Right.
But I think to your point, if you can retain your jobs, and companies can do everything that they can to maintain the shape of the business, and more importantly, avoid redundancy, I think all of us would have done a very good job in coming out of this pandemic and being the organization that we are, to the point you mentioned, what we promised when you started versus what you're going through now and how you come out of it. Now, I'm just trying to combine a few questions. There's one question which is on the top and quite relevant in terms of what we were talking about just now. What will define an attractive brand to work for in the future? Will this change? And this is by John Doyle.
Do you want me to have a swing at that one?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great question. And again, we can see after various downturns in economies that things change. I think the way organisations project their brand may change a little more, and I think people with going through this period now for half a year, whatever it might be, may tend to talk more about their organisations. So I was reflecting on this yesterday. Glassdoor has been around for, how long has it been around for? Maybe 10 years or so, something like that. I think there are going to be more Glassdoors in terms of platforms or sites for people to offer their opinion on. It's already on LinkedIn as well. I think people will be more open and honest about how their company, how their organisation has treated them. And a brand, in my mind anyway, is nothing but a perception. So if one of your teammates, one of your employees has a perception about your company, then that's their reality, and they are going to project that to other people, whether it be right or whether it be wrong. It is their reality, right? That's their perception. And so I think organisations need to be very cognizant about how people are coping and managing and how they're contributing through this particular period. And investing, so there's the brand as in your products and services. I would put a slightly different slant on that, and I would talk about your talent brand. So do people want to come and work for you? Do they want to stay with you? And how are you investing in your talent brand? How are you telling your story in an authentic way? And so for us, and this is something certainly when I joined DuPont a couple of years ago, my perception of DuPont when I joined, before I joined, was it was a paint company. DuPont hasn't made paint for 30 years, but that was my perception, right? That's my own reality, because we've done such a bad job at our talent brand. So I think smart organisations looking to attract great talent and retain great talent, they will manage the perception and the reality of their people and of potential people looking to join them.
Thanks, Chris. I think talking about people, the next question that I have on this list is, when we're talking about dealing with people and the challenging times, how are you addressing mental health within your organizations? What resources have you made available in your business, and how are you addressing the stigma behind it? Especially during this time where all interaction is digital. Probably a question for you, Imran.
Well, to say that we've been actively looking out for mental health for our employees would be a lie, right? We don't actually actively put in measures to make sure that we ensure that employees are mentally sound or mentally healthy. But again, I am very blessed with a culture that really looks out. I'm really blessed with a culture in the organization where we really look out for each other, right? A lot of our one-on-ones across the organization are not based on work. They are based on things like how are you doing at work? Are there any issues that you have at work? It's more on the softer side of things as compared to just reporting on work itself. So inherently, there's a lot of discussion about how someone is fitting into the organization, how someone is doing, how someone is faring in terms of his relationships and stuff like that. So what we can do in HR is to ensure that these things continue, right? Again, back to the social engineering bit, ensure that where we have a lack of social interaction, we ensure that people are exposed to, initiatives that maximize this kind of remote interaction, right? Where physical or face-to-face interaction is not possible, at least Zoom, right? Ensure that people are all involved, ensure there's participation across the board. HR has to be that, that function that really rah-rahs the entire organization to kind of do this. But again, I'm also blessed with a culture that this happens normally, right? I'm not able to give a magic bullet for all organizations to follow. But yeah, it really stems from the culture of the organization. The organization is inherently looking out for each other, right? You don't have to actively police it. You just have to, make sure that it runs its natural course, and if anything, amplify it through the HR department.
Yeah, I think the difficulty in mental health is the stigma behind it as well.
Right.
We as an organization, we've got Optim Solution as a service provider, which is a helpline for our employees across the region to just get on a call with experts in that area. Because sometimes you don't want to discuss your problems with your managers or your colleagues, sure, because you think that there would be a perception made at the back of it. So how can you have that anonymous conversation, whether it's with a HR business partner in your organization who remains quite neutral in terms of views and confidential conversation, or is it with partners like Optum or the others that we have in the market? I think this is an area of importance for sure for multiple organizations, and one that we can't really neglect as to what someone feels. Singapore is still a very strong and a very unique market globally, where you have got the cosmopolitan nature quite prevalent. You've got employees, and surveys have suggested that you feel lonely because your only social networking was your friends or your colleagues, both of whom you can't see in person. So it can get daunting at times. Or it is the family you're seeing on a day-to-day basis that you were only seeing over the weekend in most of the cases. So you're spending a lot more time what you didn't spend. And in other cases, it has been an opposite reaction where I've actually got a lot of time on my own flexibility to have with my kids or with my spouse. But it differs from individual to individual, and that mental health and well-being, I think, is a very important area to look at for every organization. Now, I'm just going to wrap it up with one last question. And Chris, maybe you can take a dig at it, given that you have been mastering the fatigue at Zoom. This question is by Stu Garrow. The greatest challenge of hiring at the moment is onboarding training, where previously this was cultural immersion and training. It is hard to achieve the same over Zoom. And you talked about that you guys are still hiring. How are you doing it?
Yeah, great question, and thanks Stu for highlighting this. I think for me, this is one of the more challenging aspects of what we're going through. Yes, ever since late last year, we're still hiring and onboarding people throughout Asia Pacific, including in China, including in India. All of the interviews are remote. The e-signature happens, the background check happens. The person is still stuck at home. They get a courier, turn up with their laptop and so on, and are welcome back, from DuPont and so on and so forth. But is it ideal? And in my mind, it's not ideal. I think one of the big things, in people's lives they do is they get a new job. It's a really big thing for people. You get born, you might get married, you have a house, you die, you get a new job. They're the big ticket items that happen, in your life. And hopefully it's a celebration as well. And it's pretty hard to celebrate if, we've had people working in Hyderabad who live by themselves in their apartment. They went through the interview process, they got a laptop delivered, and now suddenly they're in a new company and haven't met anyone yet. Well, that's not ideal. And certainly as an organisation, we're looking within the safety guidelines of each government's ruling to come back to some sort of face-to-face as soon as we can. There are online packages, and there are organisations which specialise in smoothing the process out and really investing, in the person, and that's good. We certainly make sure that the person's manager, and we all know that one big reason why people join organisations is because of the person they'll be working with. It's also the number one reason why they leave. So we make sure that the manager has strong investment in the onboarding of that person pre-day one, day one, week one, and so on and so forth. But that's just mitigation in my mind. It never can take place of the real celebration. So for here in Singapore, I remember my first day, I was really looking forward to getting stuck into a new industry. And day one, met all my colleagues, and we went down to the local hawker centre and had some really spicy Thai food. That was 2 years ago, and I remember it like yesterday. So those sort of things are, I think are really important. So for onboarding, do the best that you possibly can, make it special for that person. But don't forget them, when they get that first day back in the office, how do we make their first day back in the office special again? That's my little data dump on that. Hopefully that was of value, Stu.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for that. I think that only teaches that don't take things for granted. Whether it's a pint of beer with your friends or colleagues, or whether it's just that spicy Thai food in the hawker center. I think one thing that has been taught is don't take it for granted. And I'm sure all of us will be looking forward to those conversations with our colleagues or our friends when the situation becomes better. But I think I've definitely picked up quite a few things from this conversation, whether it's related to the importance of culture building within organization, fostering trust across different markets, the mindset of solving problems rather than looking at the problems only, creating BCP within organization, being cautious about Zoom fatigue and relooking at it. What we started with, do we need to evolve from that today? And delivering on promises that we gave to our employees when they started working with us. And quite an interesting one was definitely the act on the 70% rather than being perfect. At least you'll get somewhere, and you'll get to take a step forward in the right direction. And great talent remains in demand. That's a fair assumption. And at any point of time, you need some talent, you can offer us. Reach out to any one of us at Page. This is not a marketing exercise. I'm going to jump to a conclusion now. I think I can safely say that everyone is hit by the same storm, but not all are in the same boat. All of us, our coping mechanism is bound to be different. But one thing is for sure, that we all need to reflect, adapt, and respond in this time and what will come, as we say, the new way of working. And I think the organizations that return to their old ways of working may find their competitors have taken advantage to reimagine their workforce and business. We talked about how talent has been important, and we are scouting for right talent to take care of the market share as per the polls. And I think these are all positioning ourselves to thrive in the new normal. So I think with that note, I thank, first of all, Imran and Chris for joining us today and giving insights through the lenses of DuPont and Ninjavan, both very important businesses across the globe for DuPont and Southeast Asia. A very common household name for us in Ninjavan, and Jermaine for facilitating that at the back end. And thank you all of you for joining us today. I hope you've got one or two ideas that you've picked up. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a very nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilay. Thank you, Jermaine. Thank you, Imran.
Hey, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Chris, Jermaine. Nilay.
Bye-bye.